Hello everyone. So tonight we shall discuss in the third part of this six-part series the fourth week of the counting of the Omer, which focuses on the attribute of what is called in Hebrew Netzach, translated as determination, drive, ambition, endurance, and probably some other synonyms you can throw in there. But the bottom line is that it is one of the 7 human attributes or emotions that are necessary for a healthy life. As I've discussed in the previous classes many times, the Kabbalistic model, just like there's a medical or physical model of the human DNA and genetic makeup, so too the soul is made up of components. And just as it is necessary to live a physically healthy life, to understand the different type of mechanisms that are part of our organism called the human being, the human life, and that way we can identify and diagnose where we have strengths and where we may have a weakness, what may need supplement, what may need certain type of exercise, whether it's physical exercise or it requires some type of intervention. So just like it is with physical hygiene, the same thing is spiritual hygiene. The spirit too is made of many components, and they too each need to be nourished, each need to be exercised. And understanding yourself really is understanding all these different elements with that make us tick. See, most of us are aware of the symptoms of our lives. We're aware when we react to things, whether we react with anger or with love or with hate or whatever it is that elicits a certain reaction. So we usually become aware of it once we're reacting. Hopefully. Some people are not even aware while they're reacting, but you could say most people consciously are aware of their conscious behavior. That's what consciousness means. But behavior, just like it is with anything, is only a symptom of what other underlying forces. So just as one sees, let's say, a volcano erupt, it's very clear that there are many forces at work, pressures at work, that took years to build up, and then finally there's an eruption. Same thing with an earthquake, and the same thing with any other type of storm, or any type of a disruptive situation that forces working for a period of time will build up and then cause some type of outburst. The same is true emotionally and psychologically, that most of our behavior we only see on the surface level. We don't see the forces that are shaping and causing it to be that way. So the beauty, in many ways, the eloquence and the poetry of understanding your own psyche and the components that it consists of really helps one to anticipate and sometimes even prevent and preempt different type of reactions based on an understanding of what your makeup is like, what your chesed is like, what your love is like, and what your gvura, your discipline and restraint, and what your compassion, and where we are now, Netzach, your drive, ambition, endurance. And then there are the other 3 that we'll address in the coming weeks. So the critical element here is that understanding that it's not just a optional information. It actually can change the way you behave. It can change the way you understand yourself. It can literally transform your relationships, any given area, because it comes down to really what we call know thyself, to know yourself, to know what makes you tick. And each of us have a different makeup. Even though the 7 components are the same, just like it is with the human body, a healthy body, we have arms and legs, we have eyes and ears, and we have a heart and a liver and a brain and so on. That doesn't mean it's similar to each person has the same type. We have the similar organs, but their makeup and their called complexion and composition is very different. Same as an emotional and spiritual level. The soul is made up of the 7 emotional elements of the spectrum of human emotions, human feelings, and human experiences. But what the chesed is like, that already is very different from one person to the next. And as the Talmud says, just like our faces are not alike, so too our minds are not alike, and so too our emotions are not alike. That's why you'll have situations where 2 people facing exactly the same circumstances, will have very different reactions. Well, somewhat may upset one person, another person will just wash over them. What may attract one person repels another. So it's not just a matter of different tastes, it's also a matter of obviously different conditioning and upbringing and education, but there's also inherent elements, actually hereditary elements in our emotional makeup that really distinguish one from another. So if you ask yourself a question, you can go to a medical doctor and get a physical checkup and they'll give you a bill of health, clean bill of health or whatever, and give you a good status report from head to toe. Question is, what is your status report regarding your emotional health, your spiritual health? That is far more complicated, and far less people have any handle on that, because it's not as tangible, it's not as easy to measure. But when you master this system of these seven building blocks, or 7 components of the spiritual DNA, the spiritual genome, you really can get a real picture of what you like, a snapshot, like an X-ray or a CAT scan of your emotional makeup. So that's one of my dreams and goals, which I hope to do very soon, is actually create some type of spiritual health checkup or center online that will help people through asking questions or exercises actually come to get away a certain type of picture. Obviously, you can only do that much in technology. It's always best to have something to be done in person, just like you can't really get a medical checkup online. But you can definitely get some elements that can help a person get a sense of oneself. And I think it would be a tremendous asset, literally in every component in life. How you look at yourself, how you look at others. And if you can identify, instead of just saying, listen, I feel inadequate, or I feel insecure, or I feel fearful, or I have other inhibitions, which is very general statements, it's platitudes, to actually identify what is the area that is really strong or weak in each of us. And you'd be surprised at the answer. Sometimes you think the thing you think you're strong in, you may not be so strong. It depends you may be strong in one aspect of it, but not in another. So understanding these 7 different features, these 7 attributes, and especially how they interact with each other, because that's where it gets really relevant, is that's not just love, discipline, compassion, but they each conclude 7 times 7, the 49. That's when you really can identify and see, okay, your love may be good, but then there's other components in love that may be lacking. So we'll address today, and this class is Netzach. So literal translation of the word Netzach is Netzach, and comes from the word like victory. Victory. But what is really victory? Victory, obviously we're talking about victory, winning or vanquishing an enemy, or it's a little deeper than that. It means the midah, the emotion or the attribute of wanting to overcome an obstacle. We have that type of element. Human nature is such that when you want something and an obstacle is placed in your path, so if all things are working right and you're healthy, you should be driven to overcome that obstacle. Most people will not shrink away in fear. If we do, there's a question: what happened to your netzach? So all of us, as a given birthright, by birth, just like we have love inherently inside of us, and regardless of what will happen to your love or how you'll learn, like I spoke about love, obviously our role models, for good or for bad, are our parents and our educators and society and what we've seen around us. But that still doesn't in any way, that only changes how you love. But just as we're born with arms and legs and eyes and ears and a heart and a mind and all the rest of it, we're also born with these 7 attributes. So if you're able to look at it from the second you were born, think of it as pristine, pure attributes. Just like your lungs were pure, and just like your eyes were perfect, just like every other part of you. And again, I'm speaking about, of course, a healthy child. That God should bless everyone with healthy children only. So just like so you look at a child, everything is like fresh and new. The lungs will work perfectly. The heart works perfectly. It's only after years of wear and tear and absorbing or inhaling toxins or foods that cause different type of damage and so on, that all our functions begin to get compromised. But from birth, there's a certain purity, a clean slate. Same as with our emotions. The emotions of a newborn child are a clean slate. They potentially have all the power in the world to function in the most healthy fashion, to have healthy relationships and healthy love, and not over excessive fears or insecurities or inhibitions, and all the other things that haunt us. So whatever you see, like when you look now in the mirror, and I mean the metaphorical mirror, and look at yourself, what you see today is not you in your quintessential form. It's not you as the archetype that is you. It's you as you are now been affected by by many, many factors that have shaped who you are. So as I often point out, whenever you want to heal or you want to improve something, you have to juxtapose it over something that is a standard that you can compare to. You'll ever see when a doctor takes, let's say, an x-ray of the lungs, you'll often see when they show it to you, they'll show you a healthy set of lungs, and then they'll show you the lung that may be infected, God forbid, or in some other way compromised. So you can compare and say, this is what a healthy thing looks like, and here, now people who are trained don't need to look anymore because they know the image, they see immediately an x-ray of a lung, or of a heart, or for any other matter, any other part of our mechanisms. They immediately see, okay, this juxtaposed over healthy is something going on here. So the same thing is emotionally. By understanding chesed through malchus, the 7 attributes in their purest form, you really get to understand what you're like before there was any distortion. So this netzach, this attribute called, this emotion called drive, or determination, is the natural birthright of every human being. And you see it immediately. When a child starts crawling, or for that matter, you don't have to even wait till then. When a child is hungry and they don't get what they want or need, they will cry. No one has to train the child to do that. So the child naturally doesn't just feel its needs, it also demands. It has what we would call a certain form of netzach. It's very immature at that stage, and it's an infantile state. But it's still, imagine a child being hungry and not knowing how to ask for it. So a child was born with an innate ability to cry. And so an annoying cry. And the child will persist, will not stop. Studies show, God forbid, I don't even like to mention these type of studies, but studies show that a child who's been neglected long enough, and the child obviously cannot cry forever, a distortion will take place from very early childhood. If you leave a child, God forbid, let's say not fed, or not taken care of, there'll be a point the child will simply fall asleep simply out of exhaustion. Doesn't mean the child is infected. And if it's persistent, you actually, in a sense, are damaging the netzach of the child, that determination. And there are studies shown that children at a very young age, neglect, will cause years later a constant second guessing, a constant fear, a constant hesitation, because their netzach has been compromised. Not because they don't have it inside of them, but it was they learned the wrong way, the hard way, that they are not getting what they need, and they begin to distort how they call for things. They begin to blame themselves, or the other different analysis of why someone would stop having the drive and the determination. Now these things happened as long before we were born, we're aware. So there are many, many factors in our lives that can have a profound impact. I'm not talking about a minor neglect or some type of incidental thing. We're talking about something that is more extreme. So, in other words, part of the attribute of a human being, just like there's an attribute, an emotion called attraction. We need love, and we need to give love. That's a human trait. And then there's also a human trait called gvura, which is the need to restrain, the need to discipline, the need to measure, to temper any particular experience, any particular emotion. And then there's the third called compassion, tiferes. There's also an innate element of that. There's an innate force inside of the soul that has a certain determination and drive. And eliminate that one from the 7 emotions, and you're lacking a fundamental component. A person could have love, they could have discipline, they could have compassion, humility, connection or bonding, and dignity, but they don't have drive and ambition, and they don't have a certain determination to overcome an obstacle. What will happen is all the 6 emotions will work well until there's a problem. When there's a problem, the lack of netzach will cause a person to stop and hesitate and fear. So netzach is obviously, in that context, extremely critical component. Because in other words, you could have everything intact. There are children that we may have had in school, that children that you may know, that were your friends, or you may have been you, that extremely talented, extremely bright, but something about that did not have a type of determination or drive. So it was assumed that they are fools, or they are stupid, or they don't have that potential. Because you can have everything there, but you don't have that type of drive to express it, then it remains in its type of potential state. And the same is true for many of us right now in our lives today. You look at yourself, you could say something's not working, so you can immediately chalk it up to you're lacking that. You're lacking that thing that you want in life. Let's say it's love. But it could very well be that's not at all. Your love may be very healthy and good shape, but your Netzach is lacking your drive. The determination to achieve that particular element. And it's not so easy to distinguish, because we are not always objective about ourselves, and we don't always know what is it that's really missing. Is it the drive and the determination, or is it the actual aspect, let's say, love or some other attribute? So Netzach, which I want to analyze even further and dissect even further, is this element of determination, or as I said, type of endurance, you can also call persistence. These words are all, in this context, synonymous. They're not exact synonyms, obviously, but Netzach combines them all. So, always, whenever you want to understand something, it's always best to look at extremes, and then you can modify and so-called temper it down. What's extreme ambition, extreme endurance, extreme determination? Are people sometimes that we don't actually like that much. They're very driven, and they're ready to step on anyone in order to succeed. They have this powerful element of Netzach, very competitive fighters. And they fight. And it doesn't state, they could also be unethical. They can be ruthless, unscrupulous, and so on. Obviously, there's healthy Netzach and there's unhealthy Netzach, but an extreme of Netzach is something like that. People who have that type of ruthless drive, and almost nothing can stop them in their path. So on one hand, there's an element of there's something admirable about it, which is that ability to just go forge ahead and never take no for an answer. Obviously, when it's not measured and tempered, it can be an extremely destructive force too, because they can step on everyone and consume anything in their path just to get what they want. Especially if you challenge them, it brings out the worst part of them, because they need to win. And there are people who need to win or want to win, and at the expense of everything. When we know that sometimes winning is also losing. You can win the battle and lose the war. You can win just to win for your own whatever need it is, but not really get what you need in your life. So there's always the question: do you want to win, or do you want to be right, or do you want to be happy? Do you want to win, or do you want to do what is correct, what is appropriate? So winning at all costs is not necessarily a healthy feature. Obviously, if you're dealing with a true enemy, an objective enemy, where you're protecting yourself and your children from someone that's under attack, so obviously determination then at all costs is vital, because that's self-defense, or that's protection, or that's I'm not talking about that. But I just want to spell out that Netzach, well, actually I'm talking about that under those circumstances. That Netzach is essentially all the above. Obviously, in most, and I'm using, as I said, specifically an extreme example, because that helps us just put into context what does Netzach look like when it's wild, without any limits. But if you pull it back a bit, what's the other extreme of no Netzach? So, as I mentioned before, it's a person who doesn't like confrontation at all. Well, none of it, maybe no one likes confrontation. Some people do actually, but I'm saying people who completely withdraw from any confrontation, will not defend, will not protect, and will just meekly walk away, even if they have strong values and even if they have strong beliefs, but they just don't know how to deal with the challenge. And you have that as well. You find what they call troubleshooters. Troubleshooters are good to bring in when you need when there's trouble. They're sometimes not good in a regular day, because they're good for emergencies. But each of us in our lives are going to have challenges. And how will we deal with the challenge? How do we deal with something that should be challenged? I'm not talking about a person as the first personality I described that just is always looking for a fight. Is looking for a fight even if there isn't. Here I'm discussing not someone who's looking for a fight. I'm talking about something that comes your way and deserves that you call that person on it. It deserves a challenge. How do you deal with it? And it's not always a comfortable question to ask, because many of us are not, we cover our tracks and we're not willing to acknowledge that, we should have not accepted that. We shouldn't have swallowed that. We should not have accepted that particular insult or whatever it may be. And this is where Netzach comes in the healthy level. Like I said, the other extreme would be a meekness and a fear and a lack of courage. A lack of courage, maybe a lack of confidence, an insecurity. As I said, the list goes on, but there's hundreds of reasons that cause a person to not deal with any type of challenging situation. So there's an in-between place of someone who's constantly looking to fight and someone who is a normal person, but sometimes you do need to deal with a challenge. One of the scenarios of a dysfunctional marriage or dysfunctional family life, dysfunctional relationship, is when one person is abusive and the other person takes it. I'm not talking about overlooking. We all overlook things. In healthy relationships, there's things to overlook. But if there's a persistent abuse, consistent, and another person is that type of quiet person that either saw in their own home, you just take abuse, that causes a very unhealthy balance. That from both ends. Because firstly, the abusive person continues the abuse, and the person who's receiving it is just asking for more. To the point where you'll find what they call the beaten wife syndrome. This is documented, very odd, but nevertheless documented, that there are people who can be abused in very serious ways. At some point, they just go into complete denial. They blame themselves. They say it's my fault. If I wouldn't this and that, they're always covering what they call codependence, or you call enablers, all kinds of psychological terms for these things. But bottom line, it comes down to a type of almost symbiotic dysfunctionality where everybody's feeding off each other. The abuser is playing that role. The abusee, the recipient of it, is playing her or his role. And it can go either way, man or woman. This isn't exclusive to genders. But what you find there is exactly that, a lack of Netzach. Now that not necessarily be where it began the problem. The problem could begin with an abuser. But often, two dysfunctional people that are of this nature often find each other, because this person is used and willing to accept abuse, and this person is always willing to dispense abuse. Often it goes back to childhood, it goes back to all kinds of other factors, which again is not the point to now analyze, but the point is that we have Netzach is a critical tool and a critical technique and feature in our personalities that is necessary in every given situation. Now we'll discuss next class, what the counterbalance to Netzach is. How do you stop an ambition or determination going too far? When do you have to fight? When should you yield? So obviously it's more complicated than just that. But nevertheless, this week we're focusing on is the importance of determination and drive, and not necessarily yielding. As we'll learn, Netzach and Hoid together work hand in hand, where determination and yielding work together. But here we're discussing situations where that type of drive is necessary. And I said before, young children have it. It's clear. They don't need to be trained. From the moment they're born, they demand what they need. And it's healthy. Not just that the child gets what it needs, whether it's milk or food or sleep or being tended to for health reasons and so on. But the child also learns to build confidence that when I ask and I call out for something, I will get. Not a sense of entitlement, but a sense of determination. And when there's something that isn't working, the child will demand it, will be determined to go for it. And then when you see the child develop and begin to crawl and explore, you'll see also children will learn, one of the first things that children learn is to overcome an obstacle. Let's say they're looking for a toy and they can't get to it because it's lying under a piece of furniture. So there's a stage where a child will become ingenious and figure out how to get there. All this extremely healthy elements, especially in early development, because besides that the child is, as you see, is able to solve a problem, but it's also the child is learning to be confident in its ability to overcome obstacles. And I'm talking about very small obstacles now. We're talking about, little things. And unless it's impeded by unhealthy parents and unhealthy environments, a child will develop this Netzach more and more. And then when time comes and the child begins to play with other friends and other things, the child will have a certain sense of, here's a challenge, let's deal with it. Obviously, it'll take years to really learn the disciplines of knowing, as I said before. You see children also at a certain age where they begin to take things away from others, and their determination is too much. But that's also part of the experimentation and part of growth, because that's how you learn. You learn by taking, by giving, till it gets a balance. And part of the discipline of parents is to teach a child. Not everything is for yours to take. But on the other hand, you don't want to clip the wings of a child and say, do not ever ask for something. Do not ever try to overcome an obstacle. Just accept everything. That's not necessarily healthy. It can create a certain complacency, and especially it can also create a weakness and lack of that drive that I'm describing. So this is I would say, a pretty unsung hero, if you wish, in one of our faculties, not spoken enough, of how children develop this ability to overcome challenges. Because when we look at ourselves today as adults, and you have a difficulty dealing with a confrontation or challenge, it didn't begin now. You have difficulty because you had difficulty last year and 2 years ago, and you definitely will find a pattern. If it's a consistent, obviously, if it's something that is a consistent issue. And it goes back usually to early childhood. It's very hard to define, because what exactly should we point at? And obviously, again, extreme situations, you can find children of deep neglect, absentee parents, or their caretakers and providers were simply not around. So obviously a child will lose a lot of confidence and will bring many other problems. A type of self-loathing, shame, all the different negative feelings about oneself. So it's hard to quantify. But on a positive end, it simply means that when you allow the tree to grow and to expand. You think of like a tree growing, and somebody decides to put a box around the tree, or to literally put a cement wall near the branches. What's going to happen? So a tree actually has innate ability to just work around it. So the branch will grow in a different way, just like roots. You block the roots, they will find their path to water. They will keep looking. So you see in nature an inherent drive to find what it needs, and if there's an obstacle, it'll work its way around it. But what's really happening if you make too many obstacles? Obviously, you put a tree inside of a cement box, it has no choice. I mean, a tree's branches can be strong enough and can break through, but if it's strong enough resistance, you destroy the tree, basically. You destroy its ability to spread its wings, to expand. And the same thing is in every life organism. Part of life organism is breathing, is expanding, is spreading its wings, it's experimenting, it's letting something fly, and letting it overcome whatever challenges. Now, it's actually healthy. You see, in a good schooling, a good education system, you'll see when you quiz a child, or you give them a test, or some other way of challenging them, that often is an excellent tool to help children develop skills. Because if you take a smart child especially, or any child, and you just let them easily, without any challenge, get through, you don't bring out the best in someone. So to use the expression in the Talmud, Zayis, which means an olive does not produce oil until you press it. Pressure, deadlines. You see this across the board, whether it's in athletics, whether it's in scholarship, whether it's in business drive. You always need these impediments that bring out the best of us to overcome a challenge, which is where Netzach really shines, and why it becomes so valuable. So besides what I've said till now, which is the nature of Netzach, which is that drive and determination to overcome challenge, I'm discussing now another point, which is the power that it has to reveal inside of you potential was unrealized. And if you don't have the pressure, you're never going to get there. Because let's say a person who's not challenged, so they'll give you whatever they have. They have no need to dig deeper. Challenge brings out the deepest strengths inside of a person. An analogy given for it, the simple analogy is, think of a dam. You build a dam in a mighty river. The Roosevelt Dam. Other dams that were built. And you see what it does. A big dam is like a wall. It stops the flow of water. But what happens in turn? The water begins to build up so much pressure that at some point it could shatter and break through the dam. And not only will it not be hold up the dam, the dam will become part of the pressure, the forward thrust of the rushing water. So what that pressure that's built up is only possible due to resistance. And it's actually a fundamental principle in engineering, and actually in the generation of all energy, even alternative energies, is the concept of resistance and forward thrust. How airplanes are developed, how other technologies are developed, are very much part of this whole idea of resistance. Resistance elicits deepest types of energies. You want to shoot a bow and arrow. So the farther back you pull, the further the arrow will fly. So it's always that type of resistance. The deeper the resistance, the more power is built up. And this is also true in our own personal lives. You'll see when someone's under pressure, the best will come out of them, or the worst. But the best can come out of them, because what happens is this pressure builds up, this resistance builds up a pressure inside of us. It starts building energy, a drive that becomes far stronger to overcome the obstacle. So if something is threatening a healthy person, threatening your love, threatening anything in your life, there's that part of you that begins to build the need to find solutions. And you'll see people find solutions they never would have thought of had they not been under that type of pressure. Now, obviously, everything has to be with measure, and I'm not suggesting too much pressure is healthy. We also have to have a measure we call the balance between anxiety and resolution, tension and resolution. So if there's too much tension, it could also cause problems. But if there's too much resolution and there's no tension, you will not ever have any movement. Every movement, anything that has forward thrust, always has an element of tension and resistance. And those are forces that are extremely healthy in our lives. So Netzach is the force, the determination, the drive that overcomes a challenge, whatever that challenge may be. And especially when you're dealing with relationships, which are never just steady and static. They're always going up and down, and there are challenges, and sometimes serious challenges. The element of Netzach, the element of determination and drive, is a critical component that will define how far a person, how much they'll fight. Maybe the classic story of a Netzach is Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, who was actually sometimes attributes to this attribute in Moses, Netzach. So we know that everyone knows the story, Yom Kippur story. I talk about it very often. How after the Jews built the golden calf, Moses marches back up on the mountain, even though the Jews were responsible, to beg forgiveness from God. And God refuses to forgive them. And the more he refuses, the more the Netzach in Moses builds, to the point that he challenges God in the strongest fashion. And in Yom Kippur he finally prevails, and God says, I've forgiven them as you've requested. Which is why Yom Kippur is the holiest day of the year. What was Moses? What component gave Moses the ability to do this? It was Netzach. It was a drive, a determination. He was absolutely convinced that this is the right thing, and he would never take no for an answer. This comes from a deep conviction within, a deep confidence, and obviously in this case he knew that this was true. He wasn't being obstinate about something that was wrong. Remember, it was not about him, so he wasn't subjective here, and he prevailed. And as a result, what he revealed, both in psychologically terms, that you can prevail over the most difficult situation, lives on till this day as a legacy to us, that nothing is impossible. It also lives on, it's Yom Kippur Day, the holiest day of the year, that we can achieve anything we set our minds to, and even when something was broken, it could be fixed. I mean, what better message is that? There's no human being that's perfect. So if someone to ask you what's the greatest gift someone can give you, if you ask for perfection, it's not realistic. Perfection is not doable. What you should ask for is hope, not perfection. The ability and the confidence to know that even if something doesn't work, you can always repair it. Then you know that no matter what happens, you have a solution. So most of us, maybe immaturely or childishly, would like to say, give me everything. What we want to have is, like King Solomon, the wisdom, the ability, the strength to overcome any challenge. That's far more realistic, that for every challenge you also have the strength to know to deal with it. Then you're dealing with something that is truly empowering. So all this is the concept, the message of Netzach, of determination. But let's take this a little further. So I identified the attributes, the emotion, the element of Netzach and drive and determination. The question, of course, is, and the importance of it. The question, of course, is now how do we look at ourselves today? And let's say we're lacking this, and what could one do about it? So, as always, have the cure of any issue is awareness. Knowing the issue, knowing and having a diagnosis of your own Netzach is the first step in the process. And do we have an Omer book here, by any chance?
No, I got it.
Huh?
I got the ring.
Okay. So, understanding, in other words, how our Netzach, what status it's in, and a diagnosis, as I said, is a critical component. So here's a few questions. I want to see the whole week. That's what I wanted to do. So this is not. It's only going to be where we are now.
No, you can see the first of them. Have it on the app.
Yeah, I know. No, he's telling me that. It's on the app, it's true, but it's fine. It's fine. I'll have to resort to some memory. I did write it after all. So the first step is to really look at your own determination. The question would be is, how would you rate your determination, your drive? From 1 to 10. 10 being extremely determined. And I don't just mean determined in your heart, I mean that you act on it. And 0 or 1 being very little. What happens when you are challenged? How do you react? Do you withdraw? Do you confront? Do you just agonize? I'm sure there's some more options in there. And it's a good exercise because you could also ask yourself, so what would really push you over? Let's say you're in a category that you don't really fight. You don't like to confront. But is there any time in life that something happened where it really pushed the buttons and crossed the line, where there suddenly you did something? I've seen this. I've seen very mild-mannered people that in general situations you'd never expect that they would react in any strong way. But then certain things threaten them. Sometimes it could be a child, the threat of a child, something threatened their child. Like I mentioned before, the battered wife syndrome, or the abused person syndrome. You'll see often what happens that finally changes the vicious cycle of abuse is that the abuser does something that crosses a line. So let's say you have very often the women will say, once he started threatening my child, and like one woman once told me, once he took my child and held him by the window from the 10 floors up, then I knew it's over. In other words, something suddenly shattered, something cracked open. Obviously, no one should ever have to wait for something of that extreme, but we all have situations where we see that something did push a button, and that's where it went. And it's interesting, and this should be obvious actually, that many of us who suppress our feelings of anger or resentment or being hurt, when we finally something does push you over, you often see an unbelievable amount of rage, far more than anyone else has, because what's happening is all those years of swallowing it, all the years of just absorbing it become these knots inside of you that at some point when it explodes, it really explodes in a completely disproportionate way. And you can see this. I don't know if you can identify it, but if you're trained, you can see sometimes a person is extremely calm, and they seem very mild-mannered. But if you look a little closer, you could see that it's superimposed. And it's like years of them training themselves or being forced to swallow everything. I think of one individual that I remember came to see me, having difficulty in relationships, not being able to find relationships. And he happened to have this, it was obvious to me immediately. And with a few questions, a little exploration, it was very clear. From a young childhood, he basically grew up in a very dysfunctional home, infantilized. And everything I said before about children not being allowed to explore happened to him. And he'd been so beat up that he developed this goody-goody attitude. He's just a good boy. Became this good boy that is so good that you think it's almost like perfection itself. But when you see something too good, there's something wrong. And I remember noticing it because he used to tell me thank you like maybe 30 times in a minute. Maybe that's an exaggeration. But when someone tells you thank you too many times, you may sound very courteous, cordial, but sometimes it's too much. then they stop losing meaning. And I remember this very vividly, and I remember that the Talmud says. So I told him, I said, the Talmud says, I wanted to hear his reaction, that ha'emer halal b'chol yem is ki'ilu mecharef u'megadiv. Someone who says praise every day, Hallel. Hallel is a prayer we say during holidays. We say it special days of the year. So the Talmud says an interesting statement. Someone that says Hallel every day, so you think that's beautiful. Someone wants to praise God every day for their blessings. What's wrong with that? The Talmud says that's as if you're insulting and abusing God. That's a strange statement. You could say, okay, maybe it's not necessary to say it every day, but to say it's mechar, they're actually abusing and you're like insulting God. The answer is yes, because if you say it every day, it means you don't really appreciate when something special happens. It's become, okay, I just say thank you, and thank you is almost mechanical. Then when something really happens, then it becomes also blasé. So I mentioned this to him. So I said, you say thank you so many times, I think you think you're starting to insult and abuse me. Obviously I didn't mean it that way. I didn't feel that way. I just wanted to elicit the reaction. But it was very clear, it was all part of the same thing. He learned to be good about everything, and constant good behavior. So the personality never developed. What do I want? No one knows what he wants. And it was very clear that he had a tremendous amount of anger inside of him, which you could see at certain moments, a little provocation, because that anger was, no one ever asked me what I want. I've been always told what to do. Perfect example of a Netzach completely stunted. Completely, maybe it's a strong word, I won't say completely, but seriously stunted. And it was clear to me that's exactly what he needs to work on. And now, how to work on it is another story, but first identifying, as I said, diagnosing is a critical component. It wasn't lacking other elements. He would be a very good person that knows how to love and the other attributes of the emotions. But this part, which you think is like, a greatly cooperative person, no matter what happens, he's always going to be cooperating. But that means also there's a lack of fight and a lack of drive. And a person needs to have that gumption, what do we call it, gusto, to be able to push forward and overcome challenges. And that's where Midas Netzach comes in. So when you look into the Kabbalistic and Hasidic texts, and they talk about Netzach, there's an interesting analogy that's given for it. It's actually an analogy given from war. I don't like to bring examples of war, but war happens to be a very good example, and should only be an example. We should never have to fight a war. It's a great example of many things. You know why? Because war, battles, is one of the most, I'm sad to say this, it creates the most efficiency of all. You'll see the technologies, the economies built due to war are the best ones we have in the world. There'd be no internet today if there was no war. Do you know this? The internet was developed during World War II, at the end of World War II, by the United States government, who spent a lot of money because they wanted to create a type of communication. It was far from what we have today, but it was developed. Check it out. And for years it was a complete secret, until the late 60s, early 70s, where the government, which often does, after it developed and so on, and tested it released some of the technology to universities. The first websites, well, they weren't even websites then. The first internet connections were EDUs, what we call today. They wanted to use them because you didn't yet have the coding and HTML and all that. That came a little later, but that technology was released in the 60s and the 70s. So who knows what other, just for the record, what other things are going on behind the scenes. But the point I'm saying is war. The need to overcome battles. Atomic energy, why was it developed? Because FDR and the United States government got information the Nazis were developing an atom bomb through Einstein and others. Now, you could say, well, is that a destructive force? No, but atomic energy also revealed all kinds of technologies that we have today that we would never have had. How many technologies were developed simply because of the Netzach, the human desire and drive to conquer outer space? What kind of technology? The ability to have to build spaceships, the calculations, the technologies, how would human beings survive there, the different garments, the shoes they wore. These are all today part of popular culture that would never have been developed had there not been those challenges. You go through history, you'll find that what they call war is the father of all invention, right? The father of all creation, because it's a necessity. So strangely, the thing we abhor most, war, battle, blood, death, one of the most driving forces in history, creating the most powerful technologies. And throughout history this is the case. The monuments, the architecture, the art, the music created for a few people's glorifying themselves. Again, a Netzach, a need to be remembered, a need to be memorialized. Look at the pharaohs of old. They're building the pyramids, these magnificent pieces of architecture, all because they wanted to live forever. They wanted to be remembered. So Netzach happens to be, throughout history, it is the driving force of any human being, for good or for bad, it can be either way, to overcome any obstacle and to win. You see the great warriors of history, and again for good or for bad, who had genius on one side, but they also could be very big ruthlessness. As we'll discuss next week, so they had the drive of Netzach, but they were lacking hoid, the humility to temper and not become a ruthless and unscrupulous in their drive for victory. You read about Napoleon. A big part of it, what he wanted was just victory. It wasn't even conquering something any longer. Victory itself became a taste, Netzach. And you hear it throughout history, and as I said, in Kabbalistic and mystical teachings, there's a thing called Zelu Umazeh Asa Lakim. I don't know if you ever heard that expression. It's a verse in Koheles, in Ecclesiastes. It means Zelu Umazeh Asa Lakim, that God created parallel universes. Zelu Umazeh, everything that's in the world of light, there's an equal amount in the world of darkness. So for every voice inside of you that is a positive voice, you have a negative voice. What we call it sometimes the Yetzer Tov, the Yetzer Hara, or the animal soul and the divine soul, Nefesh Elokis, Nefesh Habamis. And they each have 10 faculties. So what's called in Kabbalistic terms is called the Esser spheres, the 10 spheres of Kedusha, of holiness. And you have 10 spheres, Esser spheres of Klippa, the husks, 10 spheres, 10 energies of negative energy. Sometimes called Kis in Zohar, it's called Kisrin in the Masavusa. It means the toxic crowns, the toxic forces. So you have a certain type of balance in this world, like alter egos, a Jacob and an Esav, and they're very similar. However, one is in this world and one is in that world. So when you talk about Netzach and drive, like with all the other emotions, you could have it completely in very healthy and holy ways. I mentioned Moses, others who went and overcame a challenge. Mordechai would not bow to Haman. It was very strong of him. It was a Netzach expression. There it was appropriate. And then you have Netzach on the other extreme, people who became tyrants, also with great drive and ambition, but they did it in a way that was unhealthy, hurting others, and for unholy causes. So Netzach can go in two directions, just like Chesed can, just like Gvura and Tiferes, everything can go in two directions. In the Omer book, I focus primarily on the positive and how to develop it. It deserves its own book. What happens when these 7 emotions are used in a horrible way? They all go askew and they become distorted forces. So, one of the analogies given, going back to the analogy of war, is what happens when a king or a leader or an emperor or anyone goes to war. You suddenly see something that happens that doesn't happen any other time. He will open up the coffers of his deepest treasures in order to win the war. If there's no war, they remain locked and sealed in vaults, in banks or whatever. No one ever sees them. But give him a war, give him a battle, suddenly you'll see that it's an expression of vazbez kola eitzes. He'll actually waste, he'll throw out all his fortune to win a battle. You see this today in litigation often. You see it in other situations where there's great challenges. So this again could be taken in a negative way, could also be taken in a very positive way. In a positive way, what does it refer to? That each of us have very profound and rich treasures within our hearts and souls. And challenge elicits the midas hanetzach, the midas hanetzach, that drive and ambition and determination to overcome. And therefore, as I said earlier, with the oil, when you're pressed, it brings out the best of you. This elicits the deepest resources within us. So you'll see when two people love each other, beautiful. When there's a challenge to their love, there's something broke, like the story with Moses. and then the two people who love each other dig deeper to find a solution, levels of love, unprecedented levels of love will emerge that would never have emerged had they not had the challenge. And again, everything has to be taken with measure. Not every challenge is healthy, and that doesn't have to go to extremes. But that is a factor that Netzach achieves. So to use an example, or to use actually halachic, I'll use a legal example, which is also part of American constitutional law, taken from the Talmud. And the issue is this: if you make a contract with someone, you sign a contract, and then someone challenges the contract, says, I had a contract with you before, the contract wasn't signed properly, there were no witnesses, whatever, some type of challenge to the contract. Basically what's called in Talmud, shtar sheyotza alav irur. A contract that someone claimed is an illegal contract, a wrongful contract, or something's wrong with it. Okay, so how do we? And the person who has the contract says it's a legal contract, legitimate. The other one says it's not. What do? So obviously you have to dig and bring evidence and witnesses to uphold it or not uphold it. So the Talmud says, and this is a legal law, that if a contract is upheld after appeal, it's upheld. In other words, it was challenged and then it was proven to be true. And witnesses emerged, or there was someone that saw that how it happened, whatever, some way that is confirmed and ratified, it says you can no longer appeal it. It has what's called a kiyum, a certain permanence. You cannot appeal it again. Now we have in our court of laws, we have ideas of appeal, second appeal, third appeal, but there comes a point, in the davar sof, as they say, there's no end. So there has to be a point, the Supreme Court, where you can no longer appeal. This is it. And once the Supreme Court rules, it gives whoever wins a certain permanence that this can never ever be challenged again. No one. I mean, you could bring another case that's similar, but then precedent, etc. But the idea is here that a negative brought a positive, that a weakness, that a challenge brought out a strength that could never have been brought out beforehand. Or to use an example, let's say of a rope that rips. So it's weak. But what do you do when you want to reinforce a rope that rips? You'll make sure to put so many reinforcements it'll be stronger than it was before, so it should never be able to rip again. So there are situations like that so-called a negative brings out a positive, and the challenge brings out deeper strengths. It's what happens when any of us redeem a mistake we made. So mistakes are painful. But imagine a mistake you learn from, and next time around you put in preventive measures that doesn't happen again. And when that happens, and when you do that, you're far stronger. You know what do they say about a man with money meets a man with experience. So the man with experience ends up with the money, and the man with the money ends up with the experience. Right? So that's how it works. So hopefully, you may have lost the money the first time, but now you learned the experience. If it happens more than once or too many times, maybe you should go out of business, go into a different business. But the point is, as they say, experience is what happens to you when you don't want something to happen to you. That's what experience is. And that teaches you if you learn from it. Now, if you don't learn from it, you don't learn from it. What was the story they said about, which company was it? I think IBM. So it was a new vice president of manufacturing was hired, and he made some blunder. He made a mistake that cost the company a good few $1 million. I think it was actually more than a few, maybe it was in the tens of millions. And he was sure that he'll be fired. His superior calls him in, and he's ready to get the axe. And he says to him, listen, it cost us whatever, these $10-20 million for you, that for you to be trained, and that's what it's the price we paid. And of course, it brought out of him the strength and the power that he did things for the company that were made more money for them than they would ever have made. This was the wisdom, I guess, and the foresight of a superior who saw his strengths and realized he made a mistake. But instead of just taking it out and realized this can be a great lesson. Yes, it was an expensive lesson, but it ended up being a far greater boon, a far greater profit made out of it. Obviously, one has to always measure these two, and knowing when it's worth it, when it's not. But it's a tremendous lesson in life, especially psychologically, to know you have this midas hanetzach, Because what Netzach does in the healthy form is it really gives you the strength, the confidence that you can overcome obstacles. And when you've done it once and twice and three times, it builds that confidence. And you see this even in things like sports. You always hear about the people in the World Series or in the Super Bowl or the playoffs and so on. Experience. You always talk about experience. There's experienced people on the team. You always wonder, experience, what is that? So, but this guy's got talent. This one has experience. What do I need the experience? I want the talent. Obviously, talent plus experience is better than talent minus experience. But experience is seemingly overrated, or seemingly so. It's not overrated. Because experience is not just that you did it before. Experience is also you overcame the challenge and you knew you can do it. So besides that you learned the technique, there's a certain confidence that's built up because you've gone through the difficulties. I think I mentioned this. I remember the first time I actually had to write, for years, as I've many times shared, I used to work for the Lubavitch Rebbe writing the talks. On Shabbos and Yom Tov, we had to memorize hours and hours of these lectures and talks. And then remember, when I began writing, so in 1979 was the first time I had to actually write a whole farbrengen and a whole talk of hours on paper, and I had to do it from memory. I mean, we had notes that we all had summed up what we remembered after Shabbos, but I remember vividly, it was Hanukkah, 1979, end of 1979. Before most of you were ever born even, right? Before the wars, before many wars. Before the war, is how we used to say it. Which war? Not sure. What's the war before 1970, after 1979? Oh, there were many, huh? Vietnam was over then. So was the Korean War. And there were always wars. So I remember sitting Saturday night, and I'm sitting at a typewriter, and I'm working. I can't. Those days was a typewriter, no word processor. So you know what typewriters were like? When you typed a page and you didn't like it, what you did was you pulled it out of the typewriter. And if you're really frustrated, you pulled it out quickly and made it ripped, and then you had to pull it out from the rollers. And then you crumpled up in a ball and threw it into the garbage can. So anyway, these balls were being thrown into the garbage can. It was like mounting a garbage can full of these first page drafts that weren't going anywhere. And it was already 3 or 4 in the morning. And I was getting increasingly frustrated, and frankly, I really thought it's not for me. I took upon myself something I can't do. It was like unbelievable. I felt really horrible. And I remember my father didn't sleep much. He was in the house. I think he woke up, or he suddenly sees me sitting there agonizing at the typewriter. And at this point, the typewriter was empty. I said, "You know what? I'm not typing another page until I get it right. There's enough with these crumpled up pages." And I remember she just told me calmly, he's a writer, a journalist, he was a writer, so he said to me, "Look," I told him, "I don't think I could do it. It's just not happening." So being a veteran writer, he said to me, "It's always going to be that way. Throughout your life, when you write, it's always going to be that when you sit down, you don't think you can do it. And it's difficult, especially the beginning. You start writing, it's not going, and so on." He says, "But what happens is that in 30 years from now, you look back and you'll say, you still know it's difficult, but you'll know you can do it. And it's going to take a few times till you get that confidence." And I can say it's absolutely right. Today, it's more than 30 years. What's 1979? We're talking about 34 years ago, right? Is that correct? Yeah, wow. 34 years ago, I could say, without question, it's exactly true. Writing is always difficult. It doesn't come, even though for people who don't write, they think it comes easy. They just see something written, they think it's just knocked out. So yes, good writers, and sometimes you're in the zone, things fly out of you, but nevertheless, it's always difficult. But you always know, because you did it, you can do it. You can get to the finish line. But it still doesn't mean it's not frustrating and not kind of challenging. So what happened then was that night, 4 o'clock, by 5, 6 o'clock, I started getting the first page, semi-decent, what I liked. And then the second page and the third page. And I did it. That talk was at least 80 pages I had to type. It was 80 pages of material. But once I got through the first pages, obviously it got a little easier. But I remember the next week was the same thing. But every time I did it, like I knew you can do it. I'm not saying anything that's really brilliant. I'm sure each of you in your own profession or expertise have similar experiences. But it's a tremendous lesson in what's called Netzach. Because if you don't have the determination, forget about it. Because it's difficult. And the first and the second time, it's just very easy to just say, you know what, this is not for me, and I just quit. I could have done that. I mean, my determination didn't let me do it. My pride didn't let me do it, to be very honest. And Netzach was in full glory at work. But I could tell you from that, it was a perfect example, for me at least, how Netzach can be a tremendous asset. And I see, sadly, so many times people who I see really talented and strengths. I remember even in my work, there were guys that were really good. And in my opinion, they could have been excellent. And the Netzach was lacking. Everything else was there, but the Netzach. I remember one guy even told me, he said to me, I don't know how you do this. I can't deal with this type of failure. I says it's my ego is being, it's very a fragile ego, and every time I think that this is not going to look good, I just can't accept failure. And he didn't proceed it. I mean, he's successful in his own right, but the success that he could have achieved, especially as a writer, would have been tremendous. But for some reason, his Netzach was not fully functional. I don't think it was out of birth. I think it was due to his own upbringing and being knocked many times and being told he can't do things and so on. I have to say, thank God, my father was the opposite. He gave a tremendous amount of confidence, even when you didn't deserve it. But you build confidence. When you build confidence, it's a tremendous tool. So I'm saying all of this simply to give a context, because each of us are different. No one sitting in this room or listening online has exactly the same way that you deal with your Netzach. That's why it's critical to really look at yourself and see how do you deal with situations. Now, there's an interesting twist to all of this. There's some people that thrive only when there's challenge. That when there's no challenge, they're just very mediocre. You give them a crisis, they're suddenly at their best. And there's something even more bizarre. There are people who actually create crisis wherever they go, because that's how they succeed. Crisis became their norm. And I've seen this. I've seen people growing up in very dysfunctional homes. In relationships later, they're constantly creating crisis. And when there's no crisis, they go crazy. They're anxious. Like, what do you mean? How come there's no crisis? And crisis, they await crisis like it's like the gift. When most of us don't want to be in emergency mode. Should be once in a rare moment. If you're in emergency mode all the time, your adrenaline is flying, you're flowing, and you have the antenna up. It wears you down. At some point, you just can't continue living on that type of high octane level. Steroids, natural steroids. So those are extremes when Netzach is completely out of whack. Where you're simply, when you've been around enemies all the time and everything is fearful, that you constantly have your antenna up. So Netzach is always vigilant. That's again an unhealthy extreme. But to bring it back to a healthier one is really understanding, looking at yourself and really determining or trying to assess where do you stand with this. So these are very simple questions. How do you deal with confrontation? Does anything ever really push you over? What happens once confrontation happens? Does it make you angry? Are you in control? Are you calculated and know how to solve a problem, or you just go crazy from it? Or do you the other extreme? You just withhold and just withdraw and just go as if nothing happened. There are people like that too. The fires are burning, they walk through like nothing. Like as they say in Yiddish. They don't nothing happened. And that's another form of protection. So assessing that is a critical component. And of course, determining if there is a extreme of Netzach one way or another. But once you do get an assessment, especially if you go through this week's 7 days in Netzach, the love in Netzach, the discipline in it, the compassion, the Netzach with the Netzach, the humility, and the bonding and dignity, you'll have a far better picture of this particular element of your genome. Actually, we were thinking of the name of the app. We did my Omer, but we were thinking of calling it Gin Omer. But the app, we tested it with a few people, and they, even though it's cute genome, but many people wouldn't have gotten it. It would have been a little too complicated. What do you think? Huh? GEN-Omer. We could still use it one day. But so this genome, to be able to dissect and analyze and diagnose this element is a critical piece. Then once you do that, there comes the second point. So how do you deal with once you understand the diagnosis of your own Netzach, your own, we'll call it drive, determination / ambition, endurance, think those are the 4 key words. Then comes down to what you can do about it. Now, I can't go through every scenario and every diagnosis, obviously, so I'll just go through maybe the most important one of all. How does one develop let's call it stunted, or weakened, or let's call it, what's the word I want to use? Somewhat underdeveloped Netzach. So think of it this way. What would happen, I mentioned before, children. Young children, from birth, have a healthy measure of Netzach. They have a measure of determination. They're hungry, they cry. There's an obstacle, they'll overcome it. And as they develop and grow, you'll see, as I mentioned before, children looking for a toy will figure a way to get it, even if it's blocked. Obviously, they can't do everything, but there's a drive. And healthy parents will allow children to have this exploration. You actually want them to overcome a challenge. Because it builds confidence, it builds skills, it builds ingenuity, and so on. Going back to what I said before, like let's say, should you build a cement wall around a tree and not let it spread its limbs, its branches? Should you in some way constrict the child from really exploring and overcoming challenges, which God forbid one is doing then, is literally undermining the Netzach development. This doesn't mean that Netzach disappears. It just means it goes to sleep inside of you. It would be the equivalent, God forbid, if somebody tied up a child's hands and doesn't let them use them. So the hands are still able to function, but after a while you stop using them because you were not allowed to, or they became impossible for you to access. So the forces and attributes in our own heart and soul that may have gone so-called undercover, or dormant, or somewhat stunted, or underdeveloped, doesn't mean they're not there waiting. It just means that you have not exercised them. If you think of it, if you can envision that, the image of that, think of it, if you can envision, here's the Netzach inside of your soul or your heart. It's all crumpled up, like those balls of paper that I mentioned. It's all withdrawn. Think of it like a turtle inside its own shell, withdrawn. Something happens, a challenge out there, this tool is not there for you to access, so you just walk away. You withdraw, you ignore. There are people, like you see this very often. There are people, when you say something sharp to them, someone that loves you says something sharp, some people attack in return, and some people withdraw. Called the silent treatment, which sometimes can be far more devastating actually. There's passive-aggressive, there's aggressive-passive, and there's aggressive-aggressive. Won't go through all the Shtaim, Shein, Arba, the whole 4 dimensions here. But passive-aggressive means that the aggression is through being passive. That's how one is aggressive. Like a silence that's louder than words. So each of us, again, reacts differently to different situations. But what happens to the Netzach that is not allowed to express itself is it goes back into its shell and it sits there. And as the years roll on, without experience and without confidence, it becomes harder and harder to ever express it. But if you envision that, then you understand immediately what needs to be done. You need to begin exercising this tool. It would be like a muscle that went into atrophy, a muscle that hasn't been used. So of course you don't just suddenly force the muscle to work. It can be damaging. What you do is you essentially begin to slowly massage it, slowly warm it up, prepare it, prime it to be able to begin to be used. It's like, let's say you keep your eyes, your eyes are closed in a dark room for a long time. And you go out to the light. You don't just. There's a moment you have to acclimate yourself until you're able to open your eyes and really see light. Same thing as in this case. One needs to slowly train it. So the suggestion is very simple. You have to find small baby steps where your determination and drive are tested, that are not very risky, not very difficult, but they're small steps, but consistent steps that help a person overcome a challenge. Good teachers, good educators, good parents do this with their children. It's like you see this often even in sports, like someone's jumping over the bar or something like that. So then they hire the bar, and higher, and every challenge as you go gives you a little bigger challenge. The same thing is psychologically and emotionally. that when you are given a challenge and you see you can overcome it. One of the things they do in camp, when we're kids in camp, these different things called color war. I don't know, I think it's universal, pretty universal in this country. Or other type of so-called teams. The competitiveness. In truth, I always thought about it many times. I remember as a kid, I was on one hand I liked it, on one hand I really didn't like it. Because here you go, you suddenly become an enemy with your friends. This one's on this team, you're on that team. It always reminded me of musical chairs. The game musical chairs? You play a song and there's 8 chairs and there's 9 people. And they're supposed to sit down, so someone's going to be left out. So whoever grabs the chair first when the music stops. Then it goes down to 6 chairs and 5 chairs. I always found it quite cruel, actually. Frankly, I used to always win not always win, but I was always pretty good. But there was always these kids that just were so clumsy, they could never find a chair. And I felt bad, like demonstrating openly that someone's not good at it. What do you have to do it that way? But on the other hand, and this of course needs wisdom how to do it in a way that's never humiliating or demoralizing. But there's another hand, a competition that is healthy. There's a thing called kinas sofrim tarba chochma, which means healthy envy. Actually, tarba chochma increases in wisdom. When you have 2 people and they're competing, each will actually make the other one stronger and better. You see this again in sports and in other situations where excellence brings out excellence from the other side. And when there's mediocrity or weakness on one side, the great one will not play as good, will not be as good. So it's always a matter of measure. But a healthy approach is, the key thing here with all these games or all these different exercises is we're trying to train children in school or in camp and so on with methods that they see a challenge, they see a competition, and it causes more ingenuity and ideas of how to overcome this challenge, of overcome the obstacle. You're really doing is training Netzach. That's what you're really doing. So it's actually a very healthy approach, both for ourselves and also for our children, to actually think of ways, especially from young age, if you're a parent of children that are that age, or if it's ourselves, to think of ways of how you can do it in a way that's not overwhelming, that's not going to cause a breakdown, obviously, and definitely not demoralization, but actually steps that are challenging. A while ago, I remember a young student, young relatively, a guy in his late 1920, came to speak to me, and he was studying, and he wanted me to give him become his mentor, and give him actually tests to test him. So, I said to him, okay, because he felt if he had benchmarks, if he had milestones, if he had goals, it'd be far easier for him to reach somewhere. So I did that. I suggested a few things for him to do, and after he came back, it was like pulling his feet. After a while, the guy just disappeared. And I asked him. I said, not that I wasn't insulted. It was for him. It was a favor. I did him a favor. So he said to me, he can't feel it. He doesn't feel comfortable doing this or that. So I said, so why'd you ask me in the first place? He says he knows he needs it, but he's not able to do it. I really couldn't help him, to be honest, because you can't challenge someone who doesn't want to challenge themselves. But he asked for it, but then withdrew. And I realized that things are far more complicated, because many of us may even realize we need it, but then when it comes to it, all our defense mechanisms comes into play, and we don't act on it. So it's a critical component to also know what you really have in you. Just to force something and then say you failed, that's not the goal. So the key is to find actual things where you can exercise your determination and your drive in small scenarios, in little details. An example would be, which is pretty non-threatening, anything when you're dealing with children, or dealing with, I don't want to compare, but dealing with special needs people, volunteering. So there's always going to be obstacles. Why? Because you're dealing with someone, let's say, handicapped or in some other way challenged, and you have to find ways to help them grow. It's a very non-threatening situation, because here's a situation, you could be helping someone, and you'd be surprised that when you find ways to help in that way, and I say children as well, because children also have their own needs as they grow, these things tend to suddenly develop in you skills that you wouldn't think you had. You're able to help solve a problem. So, to throw yourself and do that in the biggest scale level, if you haven't really done it, it's going to be difficult. But to find small examples like one I just said is a critical component. And the key thing is not to succumb to the trap of modern age, which is that you press a button, you get a magic pill. There's no such thing. When it comes to human development and character development, especially in the areas of love and relationships and emotional growth, there's no magic pills, period. There are no crystal balls, there's no buttons to press. It comes down to something none of us like to hear: painstaking work. Simply, yagaiti matzasi, which means you work hard and you find the reward. The interesting thing is sometimes you don't have to work as hard as you think, but you have to begin with that attitude that you're going to invest. And then sometimes God or other factors come into play and it comes easier than you would have imagined. But to go with an attitude that I want a quick fix and give it to me now rarely works. I don't know if it works at all in areas of emotional growth or emotional relationships. As I pointed out many times, we live in a very modern technological age where we've been deceived to think that everything can be gotten immediately, anytime, anyhow, anyway. If you have the money, nothing can stop you. But you press a button, you can get any type of fruit in any season, whether it's in season or out of season. We don't even know what seasons are anymore. And once upon a time, you lived on a farm. You sure knew when a season was. You knew what fruits are in season, what are not. You knew what you're going to eat, what you're not going to eat. You press a button. So two things are lacking in our day and age, or lack of appreciation of. Number one, that true things emerge. And number two, that things take a process. There's a process. Just like a child needs 9 months to develop in the womb, and a seed needs the years it needs to develop until it turns into a sapling, sprouts, grows into a big tree. That's life. There's a process and there's an emergence. As opposed to, instead of emerging, acquiring. You can't acquire it. You can't acquire a tree. You have to plant it. I know today you can just buy it once it's already grown, but that's another story. But there's a process and there's an emergence. Same thing is with our Netzach and with any particular emotion. There's a process. It's a process of exercising it, developing it, and then comes the results. So basically it comes down to this. Netzach determination drive is a critical component. Without it, we're basically rendered almost paralyzed. Yeah, you can function when things are going smooth, but as soon as there's an obstacle, what do you do? Netzach has that ability to overcome obstacle, to dig deeper inside of us. And the critical thing is to begin developing it on an ongoing basis, which means to find projects, activities where you have to exercise your Netzach. A situation where there will be an obstacle and you will find a way to resolve it. You do it in baby steps, as I said first. And then you take on bigger situations. Nobody likes pressure. Nobody does. My day today, without going into details, are a lot of pressures today. I mean, I can't say they were negative. They were negative. They're pretty positive, actually. But you hate them. You say, God Almighty, another pressure. Why? Just when you think, like as they say, when, what was it, the line? When Spielberg released that first film that was a hit, you know what it was called, right? Jaws. Remember Jaws? Jaws was sharks. The big whites were attacking, the great white sharks were attacking people, So it was a whole film. Came out in the summer of, in the 70s sometime. Which year? 76? Okay. So the advertisement for Jaws was, which I never forgot, I don't remember the film, but I remember the advertisement. It says, just when you thought it was safe to get back into the water. Essentially eliciting that horror. Just when you thought, so to me it was always like, just when you thought everything is going nice, the sharks appear. It's interesting, sometimes just when you get out of the gate, okay, great. Like they say, it's never a dull moment. So, but the pressures today, right now sitting here, I feel very relaxed and calm because I overcame the pressures. Thank God. My Netzach kicked in. And it's healthy to look for things that have these type of challenges, especially if those are the things you fear. As I said, I would not begin with obstacles or an obstacle course that's too difficult. You begin with jumping over a foot. Then we'll go to the next 2 feet and 3 feet, figuratively speaking. The second thing is to be around people who have Netzach. You know that one about the paratrooper. The guy wanted to train to be a paratrooper, so he went up in a plane, And the training goes like this: you stay in a month up in the, you go for a month every day with fellow paratroopers who are veterans, and you learn the techniques, and you learn how to dress up, and you learn how to jump, and you hang around, and you learn. So he goes up with his group, this new potential paratrooper, and he begins the training. Well, a month passes, and the sergeant says, "Okay, sir, time today. You're jumping." Okay, fine. I'm ready. Anyway, packs up this. He knows how to do the whole thing. He packs up and he watches the guys do it, and he's following them. And a few of them jump, and then he looks down. Oh, he jumps back. He says, "Oh, no." He suddenly sees 20,000, 30, whatever the amount of feet. I'm not jumping so fast. He got scared. Besides that, he was afraid of heights. Didn't help. So, okay, fine. That's also common. So you have another month. Give you another month until you build the courage. Another month passes. The day comes. Yeah, he's all gung ho. Blah blah blah. He goes this, looks down. No. Okay, so the sergeant says, "Listen, my friend, this is definitely not. This is evidently not for you. So you should sign up somewhere else, another part of the military. You do other things. You don't need to do this. It's for particular types." He says, "No, I love this. I really want to stay here." He says, "But you're not going to jump. You're never going to jump." He says, I'll help out. I'll help out with the food. I'll help out with the packing. I'll help out with this, whatever." So he says, "Why are you insisting on being here? You're never going to jump." He says, "I may never jump, but I like to be around people who jump." That was what he said. So it's an interesting phenomenon. He likes to be around people with courage. Makes him feel good. It makes him feel confident because he sees everyone around him is confident. Beyond the joke, there's actually, the truth is that when you're around confidence, it usually actually helps you build confidence. Because the other way around as well, when you're around people who are fearful, it also helps build fear. You ever remember the required book that we all read when we were in high school called The Red Badge of Courage? Remember that one? Civil War. Anybody remember it? Red Badge of Courage. Rabbi Stephen Crane, was it? I think. Yeah, I just remember it back, who knows how long. I think I'm going back. I feel like I'm regressing to my teenage years. I talk about 1979. Now it's 1973. Okay, I guess that's what happens as you age. You start going backwards too. Back to the future, as they say, right? So, no, I'm just kidding. Don't take that seriously. So last time I made such a joke, I got a few emails from people watching. They say, "What's happening? What's going on with you?" They thought I'm losing it. But I assure you all, I'm not losing it because I already lost. Like Bob Dylan says, when you have nothing. When you what's the word? Can't even remember. I am losing it. When you've got nothing to lose. Okay, that's the key. Anyway, so The Red Badge of Courage was this classic book by Crane about a guy who goes to the Civil War, and instead of fighting the battles, he's always hiding in groves and in caves and behind trees, and he has to live with this red badge, with this fear, this coward. He was the coward. So a lot of his friends died and got killed, and he ends up surviving the war, but he comes back knowing that he never fought a stupid battle in his life. He was always hiding. Whenever there was the battles, he would go run away. Can you imagine? So it's an interesting story of coming to age and the rite of passage and growing. I don't even remember the end of it. I just remember there's a lot of shame involved. But the point being that courage is a big part of as well, and conviction is a big part of this Netzach determination, and that leads me to point number 3. So I said point number 1 is to exercise step by step. Point number 2 is to be around people who have it. And point number 3 is I think a step even beneath Netzach, before Netzach, and that is the question that many people have, and I ask this very often to young people in America, United States. It's a country, prosperity, comfort. We have not had a war on this soil since the Civil War. So there's blessings, great blessings in this country. Europe has had wars. One war, World War I, World War II. So there's an element when there's comforts. There's also what grows up. It also tends to lead to complacency. It's a question I often ask young people, and I ask myself as well. Like, is there anything you're ready to die for? And I don't mean physically die. I mean, be ready. Something so important to you that it's not optional. And the best answer you get when you ask that is, this football games, my team, or video games. Nobody even thinks in those terms because we have not had to fight a war to crystallize what we believe in. And that creates a very fundamental, what can I say the word for it, a decay. A type of decay on the level of what we stand for. So where would a person really have a netzach, a determination and a drive when they don't even know what to drive for? What should I be driven? Make money? Okay, that's a drive many people have. Some people have the drive for power and influence. Others for being honored and glory. So these are drives, but even the most driven person for these things deep down knows they're all ultimately arbitrary. None of those are permanent. Nobody takes their money with them after they die. And there are many mystics, especially the Buddhists and the Far Eastern and others, the psychologists, that will tell you that deep down there's an unconscious fear everyone has that I am insignificant. An unconscious fear that I will die one day and no one will remember me. Even if you have family, but basically I'm negligible. So if you have that attitude and your biggest drive is for things that are of temporary pleasure, I said money, sexuality, the power, glory, influence, everything, how much Netzach can you already have? Now it's true, there are people that are crazily driven. There are people who committed suicide after the crash, both back in the 20s and recently. Money. They're ready to die. It's more important to them, their money, than their lives, which of course is insanity if you think about it. Or people who do other crazy things. People who are at war just to win. Again, things that are temporary. That just shows you how distorted people can be. But deep down, what really causes a person to have true determination? So if you look at healthy people with determination that have that type of drive, you'll always see that they have some type of permanent, eternal cause. Something that lives on forever. Something spiritual, essentially. The Jewish people are a perfect example. And we say Netzach Yisrael. Netzach. There's an expression, Netzach Yisrael. The victory, the endurance, the prevailing, the perseverance of the Jews. Which many people hate, actually. Because everything dies. Why do the Jewish people not die? Every empire has fallen. So, as such, the answer to it is because they always had a cause that was greater than their own material lives. And when you have a cause, then there's a reason to have such determination. Why would Mordechai not bow to Haman? His life would have been far easier. So would have been much easier for the Jewish people. They wouldn't have had to contend with a Hitler who was about to massacre them all. Why couldn't they just compromise a little thing? He'll bow down to him, a big thing. And same with Moses and Abraham, and go through history. Because it wasn't about a matter of principle. It was a matter of conviction and believing in something that was more eternal than my immediate comfort. And that is a netzach that is impossible to replicate. So I want to conclude with that point, because that to me is the key. The reason many people lack determination and so on, besides the factors I mentioned earlier, which is our childhood and the dysfunctionality and the abuse and things that clipped our wings and didn't build our confidence, it's also many of us lack a cause. Not to quote another book, Rebel Without a Cause. We have a rebellion, but we have no cause. Everybody has inside of them a drive, but you have to have a drive for what? What's your drive? Where's it going? I could submit that most people drive, they actually replace it with the things I've listed before. Money, sex, the other pleasures, and influence, power, the list goes on. Whatever it is. When I call, acquisitions, it could be cars, it could be cigars, it could be whatever it is. Most addictions are a product of a netzach that's misplaced. Mediocre people don't get addicted so quickly. It's passionate people that do. And they have nowhere to go with it. So it's the thrill of the gambling, the thrill of the alcohol, the thrill of the drug, the high, superficial or whatever, induced states of transcendence. Because there's a deep hunger. When there's deep hunger, people are driven. But if you don't find something that is healthy and enduring, you find something that is temporary and destructive at the end of the day. Because what is addiction at the end of the day? Who's in control? A person of Netzach and passion and power, he or she is always in control. What they do is a product of their passion. When addiction, what happens is, your passion, the object of your passion starts controlling you. So once that happens, that's called an addiction. A healthy person is driven, of course he's driven to a cause that's greater than he or she is. And he is in control, not the object. It's a whole different story. So there's no element of that type of dependency. It becomes something that is a force, a cause that drives a person. Now, I think I mentioned this once here. I once asked Eli Wiesel, my dear friend, of my father's, who incidentally will be speaking at our event on Tuesday night. I asked him, is it true that people actually sang Ani Mamin, which means I believe, in the concentration camps? People who said Shema, Kaddish, other prayers. So he said he was never at that side of the camp, so he never heard that quite near the gas chambers. But he definitely heard Kaddish and Shema and even Ani Mamin once in a while. So I asked him, what, at that moment, the Jews had all the right to be angry at God and protest. Why are they saying thank you? Why are they saying I believe with complete faith, even though you tarry? I feel the and praising God at that moment. And he said something interesting that remained with me. He said, you have to remember that the Jews were saying basically, you can take our bodies, but you can't take our souls. You can take our physical lives, you can't take our beliefs. And if it won't be us, it'll be our children. If it won't be our children, it'll be our grandchildren. That's what Jews always knew. That's a Netzach attitude. That's how victors think. Now you could think the Jews were the victims and the Nazis were the victorious ones. Yeah, for those moments, terrible moments, it was that way. But most Nazis' grandchildren don't want to tell you about their grandparents. And every Jew wants to tell you about his grandparents. And so you have to wonder who's victorious. And you walk down the streets of Berlin and you see little Jewish children, Lahachas, the Germans, and you see a Hanukkah menorah in the big plaza there where Hitler, Yimach Shemay, stood once and spoke for his hundreds of thousands of masses. And you go to Jerusalem, you see the Renaissance there all over Israel. So for we all got everything has its flaws, but that is very moments of great pride. Because you see who prevailed. And look, when these Holocaust survivors say, my revenge, they open up, what do you think their revenge is? Not the blowing up of a cafe, not anger, though there's plenty of that, and blood boiling and all that. You know what their revenge is? They'll open up photo albums and show you all their grandchildren. That's the revenge of every Holocaust survivor. This is Netzach. So the Jews went down, physically, but they left the song and the prayer was saying you could take everything, but you'll never take our spirit. And the spirit lives on. That's the secret. The reason it's so hard to master is because most people get seduced by the moment, and it's very difficult to hold on to such vision. You need to have unbelievable superhuman powers, because money and all the other things I listed before are absolutely what's the word for it? Absolutely seductive and powerful. They completely control. Look at a person who's consumed with a passion of a momentary desire that won't last more than 5 minutes. That's how it is. This material world has that hold. The Arizal would put it that Tzimtzum Arishan is alive and kicking and controls so much. But it's not airtight. There's a ray of hope, a ray of light, a kav that enters, and we hold on to that. V'hisha amdalanu, we say Passover by the Seder. The Afal Pi, that in every generation there's those that wanted to destroy you. V'hi is an abstract term, means she, and she withstood everything. What's the she? V'hi. So some say it's the Amunah, faith. Some say it's the promise that God made, the Haftacha. But clearly some power that was more than just the moment, and that's why we've prevailed. So it's a lesson, also a personal lesson, back to the Netzachon, that each of us, when you have to access a part in your soul that has an understanding, a relationship, relates to a mission that you're here on earth that is not optional and not arbitrary, And then you develop a determination because it has to be done. But if you don't have such a cause, then everything becomes, okay, I do it, I don't do it, who cares? Tomorrow, next day, I make it, And that is, sadly, I think the key thing that's missing in many people's lives. Finding that type of cause. Which, of course, is a discussion of its own that's far beyond the scope of what I'm discussing right here. But have the question is the answer. If you recognize this to be true, looking for a cause, and you really want to, your Netzach will kick in and will help you find your cause. And I'm more than happy to help in any way I can. That's why we call the meaningful life, as in meaningful life, purpose, mission. If any of you interested, I actually wrote up an article or two about this topic of how one finds their cause. So Netzach, I want to finally conclude, is essentially an outgrowth. Give me a cause and I'll fight for it. Many people actually say, but I don't have one yet. As long as I don't have one, I fight for things that are far more superficial. But most people do want a cause, and they will fight for it if they feel it's their cause, if they feel it's their baby, and they feel it's their mission. That's how it is. So that is also behooves us to find that cause. So, in the spirit of this Netzach week, may we all access and learn to access that Netzach inside your soul, that what we call that engine, the fire in the belly, to be able to fight for things in a good way, and overcome resistance, determined to overcome challenges. When you have a cause, you know that you're going for it, then nothing can stop you. So then you have a reason to overcome a challenge. If you don't have it, as soon as there's a difficulty, you'll say, hey, it's not worth it. But if it's absolutely necessary, you'll do whatever it takes. So I bless and wish you upon all of you that you find that cause. And you've put all the energy to conquer, to overcome any obstacle, and brings out the best strengths within you, and to really shine in the greatest possible way that each of you can shine. So until next week, thank you. We'll talk next week. Philip will not be giving his class, and we will continue next Wednesday. And I want to bid everybody, as I said, a very good Netzach Dika week. If any of you are interested in the event we're doing Tuesday night, please come over to me and I'll share with you more details. You could also check it out online if you like at gjcf.net/gala. It's in honor of my father's 8th yahrzeit, and it's also connected to the 40th anniversary of the Allgemeine, which is another hat that I wear. And with that said, it's great speaking to all of you. And yes, we do have this Omer app, free Omer app. It's called My Omer. By now I think it's working pretty well on the Androids and other iOSs. If there's any quirks, you let us know. And until next week of Haid, everyone have a great week. Thank you.